Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Cave Hour. And I haven't actually seen the statistics on the first one, but I'm imagining that it's I don't know how many hundreds or possibly thousands of views and new subscribers it's been pulling in. But if you are new, then welcome. And if you really like, cave content, which, I think we can all agree is sort of the future of, I don't know, a lot of different medias, but, YouTube and sort of talk, like audio themed, content. So this is sort of the, the forefront of a whole new, movement on the platform, which is quite exciting. And speaking of things that are exciting, I actually managed to secure a guest this time. I ran into him in the cave. I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name, which I know is really bad of me, but sorry, could you just
Unga Bunga.
Right, Unga Bunga.
Unga Bunga.
Yeah, you said that before. Thanks for, agreeing to do the cave hour.
Unga Bunga, Unga Bunga.
Right. I'm sensing kind of like a bit of a language barrier here. Actually, it's sort of, coming to light.
Unga Bunga, Unga Bunga, Unga Bunga.
Yeah, okay. So, we'll do our best to sort of like piece together from tone and context what it is that Bunga Bunga is.
Unga Bunga.
What he's saying. So my first question was going to be, would you say you identify as a caveman? Is that fair to say?
Unga Bunga Bunga, Unga Bunga Bunga, Unga Bunga.
Right. Well, I think that's a, that was probably a yes. Is there a Mrs. Unga Bunga?
Unga Bunga.
Yeah, no, is there a Mrs. though? Like, I don't know if you have cave marriage? I'm assuming, right?
Unga Bunga.
Okay, well, I got nothing from that one. I had like a list of questions, but I'm just gonna, let's just move on. So I don't know, it's a pretty new show, so I wouldn't be surprised if you aren't familiar with the Cave Hour, Unga Bunga.
Unga Bunga.
Right, you don't have to. But there's two number one rules, right? And they are no judging in the cave, and also what happens in the cave stays in the cave, right?
Unga Bunga.
Where are you going? Are you okay? He's off. He's gotten up, and yep. Okay, he's just walked out. I don't know what. Are you coming back? Should I I don't know what to do. But we don't I said about less than 30 seconds ago at this point that we don't judge in the cave. So if he's gonna get up and walk off mid cave hour, then that's that's just that's his prerogative. I'm not gonna we're not gonna judge him for that. We'll find something else to do or talk about. It might be tricky. Like I said, I had a bunch of questions, and the whole episode was going to be based around interviewing Unga Bunga. Really? Around interviewing the caveman that I was going to interview. I was talking to a friend recently about whether or not the ends justify the means when it comes to parenting and growing up. The friend in question had a pretty questionable upbringing. It was pretty rough. It was sort of a abusive stepdad type situation, right? And I kind of likened it to, or said that it reminded me of a certain character from a TV show. I was thinking of saying the character and the TV show, but if I keep it vague, then I don't have to give spoiler warnings for anything. But basically, as a character whose dad was just just fucking awful to them growing up, incredibly abusive. But in his adult life, he meets the dad again after a long time of never having spoken to him, and the dad, doesn't apologize for the upbringing at all, and in fact is sort of proud in this kind of sick way of how brutal and tough of a man his son had become as a result of the tough, abusive upbringing. And I imagine that for a lot of us, where there have been issues or like trauma growing up, part of a sort of like coping mechanism, which I think sometimes, these days we seem to use the term cope and talk about coping mechanisms like a show of weakness or something like that, but that's not the context in which I'm using the term here. I think it's incredibly normal, and it's the best a lot of us can do to like get through how traumatic life can be, right? So I think that kind of attitude that the dad has towards the son in that show I was talking about, we could even find ourselves adopting that view to ourselves, and to kind of justify what we went through and just focus, like try and turn it into a positive. And aside from maybe being able to argue that the dad might have that kind of that point of view as a way of him coping with what he did and what he put his son through, the other son during the upbringing couldn't take it anymore and committed suicide in the context in the story. So it could be his way of coping with that. For some reason, it feels, I used the word sick before, it does have this kind of gross feeling to hear somebody else, or like the perpetrator of the abuse, justify it out loud. And so as much as we can turn it into a strength for ourselves and for our own sake, if we're the victim of abuse, do the ends ever justify the means in sort of a more objective sense? Or does that kind of frame of thought kind of begin and end as a coping mechanism? And now, at this point, I think I'm pretty obviously over-intellectualizing something really just pretty obvious to me, at least, and that's just don't abuse your kids, Don't be an abusive, evil person. There are just an infinite amount of small, nuanced behaviors that parents can exhibit around their children towards, actively or passively, that are going to shape the children one way or another, whether they know it or not, or whether they mean it or not. But not physically and, psychologically, actively abusing kids is kind of, we endorse. It's kind of a double negative. I've got to be careful how we endorse not abusing children on this channel. That said, one common thread, I think, between most kinds of abusers that I've encountered or heard about in my life is that they don't... It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell if they're genuinely incapable of like understanding that they are an abuser and a bully, or like because the justifications and rationale that they use, if you approach talking to people like this like they are sort of like it's a good faith conversation where you're both sort of actively working towards the best outcome for everyone, you can't approach it like that, because they're either too stupid to be able to think on that level and reason with others. They never... I mean, stupid maybe is... I said there's no judging in the cave, alright? There's no judging even... This is kind of hard because I want to judge abusers. But, we're in the cave. No judging each other in the cave, alright? This is someone somewhere far away. So I can cast judgment outwards from the cave, just not within the cave, right? That's an elaboration on the rule. I have to add that. I've been etching it into the wall using a sharp rock I found. But it's hard to tell sometimes if they are genuinely believing their own rhetoric about their rationale and their reasons for why they are more important, and why especially they're actually the victim. It's everything is everyone else's fault, and they aren't the problem. Even though to everyone else they clearly are. To anyone who has any reasoning abilities or isn't actively being manipulated by that person, they are the problem. But one thing I think that's important to keep in mind when thinking or talking about this sort of thing is that I don't think anybody wakes up and is like, right, that's it, I'm gonna go and abuse some cats today. I'm gonna go and bully everyone. Like it's almost like a dysfunction of some kind, like it doesn't just, I don't imagine most of the time it just comes out of nowhere. The people who hurt other people within reason are still people deserving of empathy to an extent. They just make it really fucking hard to give them any compassion. In my experience, the number one thing that makes it difficult to empathize with or provide compassion for people like this, for people who manipulate and bully, is that it's often, like I said earlier about them being the victim of everything, it can be difficult to tell if they're accepting this act of human connection and understanding as that which it is, or if it's just sort of further fuel for the narrative that they're the victim, that they use to sort of escape to justify how they treat other people. And you don't really want to be like party to that. You don't want to enable it. And so it's quite difficult to connect with like people like that. But I feel like we got a bit off topic because I wanted to come back to whether or not the ends justify the means when it comes to parenting, but the opposite end of the spectrum to the one that I've already talked about. So not justifying abuse as a means because the ends are desirable or acceptable, but failing to engage in means, I guess, because they're uncomfortable and therefore not achieving ends that are important or necessary for a child's development. Now, I don't know if you can tell this by the fact that I'm hanging out in a cave right now. I'm not a child's developmentologist by any means, but I was a child at one point, and in many ways still am a child, given that actually probably is kind of obvious by the fact that I'm sat in a cave.
Ooga booga.
Yeah, exactly. Oonga boonga.
Ooga booga.
Yeah, man, it's hard to stay mad at him. But no, in all seriousness, I don't think that being a child once makes me makes me qualified to speak on child developmentology, or whatever you'd call it. I did study a bit of developmental psychology at uni, but to say that I studied it, it's kind of a strong. I was in the class when the class was happening, and I passed it. So, but let's be honest. If your standards of qualifications were adequate, you wouldn't be here listening to the Cave Hour for this kind of shit, would you? So, I think I'm pretty safe. But there is sort of a general common sense understanding of what happens when there's a lack of consequences or discipline in a household, and the sort of negative effects that can have in the other direction on a child's development. So where my friend's stepdad went, overboard in ways that aren't really,
for me to share, even if I keep them anonymous. It still feels weird. But like that TV show that I explained as well, I didn't really give details, but you know, there's physical abuse involved and all that stuff. While that's too far, going too far on the other spectrum and sort of just letting the child be free as a fucking caveman. Or, no offense. He can't understand. What am I doing? He can't understand what I'm saying. My mum, for instance, was never big on on consequences and discipline. I remember one time she took away my PlayStation controller. Just the controller. I don't know what the go was there, but I guess it's just easier. Like, it made the PlayStation unplayable without having to remove the whole thing from the cabinet in my room or whatever, like unthread all the cords and shit. I hit my sister with this like Pikachu shaped, like, it wasn't quite a plush. It was full of beads, like a beanbag, but it wasn't. It was really like densely packed and shittily sewn together. Like, if you sat on it, it would immediately burst. It was just meant to as like an ornamental thing, right? You're not meant to sit on it or play with it. But my sister pissed me off, and I hit her with it, and there were these plastic eyes sewn on, and the eye hit her, and she, you know, got upset because she got hit by something with a hard plastic bit on it. So you'd be upset, honestly. That's the only time in my life I can remember there actually being a consequence to an action. Aside from one other time, actually, where I swished and swooshed around in the bath a whole bunch, and a whole bunch of water like spilled over the side, and there was a towel on the floor that got completely soaked, and I had to wring the towel out in the bath. I know, I know I said that I should have put a trauma warning before saying this. I'm so sorry to anyone else who's ever had to wring out a wet towel because they swished and swooshed in a bath too much. I'm really sorry if that brought up any, you know, terrible memory. No, but if she would ever get mad or yell at me or my sister, our first reaction, I don't know why, it was to just laugh. And that could only have really made it worse. But nothing bad ever happened. I mean, that was how we were just brought up. Like, there are people that are like, man, if I laughed, or if I even like thought about smiling, if I thought a happy thought while one of my parents was yelling at me, I would have copped a smack, like, and I would have deserved it, and I would not have thought of it as abuse, because like it taught me, I don't know, like, there's a difference between that kind of physical, I don't know if you'd call that like abuse. I don't know if it's on the same spectrum, maybe, as just sort of mindless, like, for no reason abuse, like real abuse and traumatic abuse. But for a lot of people who grew up with that kind of upbringing, I can imagine that they would be quite shocked by my upbringing. That's sort of like a middle ground where I can see how it wouldn't necessarily be a like a coping mechanism that you're justifying physical abuse or anything like that, but just like like that's just how life is. There are consequences to actions, and if I was being a little shit, I would cop it. And just to be especially clear, not a child developmentologist, like I said. And I highly doubt that the main answer to life's problems as a parent is to dole out smacks or slaps or, you know, whatever. There are other ways to teach children about consequences to actions and responsibility for actions and so on. Now, I am thinking about, you know, wrapping up the cave hour pretty soon, but what I did do just now was I paused the recording, and while my reception in here is not great, I called my sister, and I asked her if she could remember any time from childhood where she sort of had to face a consequence, like a disciplinary action or a punishment, right? And she could not think of one. Now, that said, she did say something that I felt was kind of quite enlightening, and it was basically that in lieu of a sort of consequence and punishment type parenting framework, that she felt that we were brought up in more of a expectations disappointment type framework, which she sort of said was, she didn't call it that, I'm calling it that, because I am a child developmentologist. I don't know why I said I wasn't before, I clearly am. She was saying that if you set expectations appropriately and set them high to an extent, I think what she meant by expectations were expectations of like common sense, common decency, things like that, of what is expected of you, of your behavior, and so on. And it can be about not wanting to disappoint the person who's enforcing these expectations. And I asked her if it was just about avoiding disappointment, because that didn't really sound like that didn't cover the full scope of what I felt she was trying to say, and it sounded kind of like it wouldn't work if it is sort of like a negative reinforcement or a negative motivation. And she said she thought about it for a bit and thought that it was mostly about not wanting to jeopardize the relationship with the parent. And so long as there was we struggled to find the word. She said I didn't want to lose the friendship with our parent. And I thought about that and I was like, man, I can't think of the right word either. And then I've realized, I guess it's as cheesy as it is. It's like, if there's a real love there, that's a powerful enough reason to maintain, I don't know, good behavior and the decency, and to try and achieve those expectations to an extent. I know I said that and I talked about it in terms of like frameworks and child psychology and shit, but it was also the ramblings of a madman. So if it didn't make sense, sorry, I guess. Hopefully it made some semblance of sense.
Oonga boonga.
Hey, look who's back! Just in time, mate, for the ending. The show's The Cave Hour is coming to a close song.
Oonga boonga, oonga boonga boonga.
That's right. It's time. It's that time again at the end of the episode where we sing our famous theme song that we sing at the end of every episode, and it's always the same one. So let's just jump into it, Oonga Boonga.
Oonga boonga.
Now, do you want to take the lead? Do you know the words? Are you gonna be able to? You're not gonna be able to sing the words, are you? It's alright. Just do the best you can, mate. The cave hour is the best hour of all the hours, and it's ours and no one else's. Yeah. Take it away.
Oonga boonga. Oonga boonga. Oonga boonga.
Alright.
Oonga boonga.
Okay. The Cave Hour. Alright, man. Nice one. That was, we did alright. Honestly, that wasn't bad. I mean, I've never really heard a caveman sing before, I'll be honest, but